everyone. I'm Molly Curtis. I'm a survivor of a ruptured brain aneurysm and a TAAF Talk contributor. I am so excited to be interviewing Dr. David Langer from Lenox Hill in New York today. I met Dr. Langer 14 years ago. My aneurysm ruptured when I was finishing my last semester of law school in upstate New York. After 2 weeks in ICU, I was ambulanced down to New York City for surgery with Dr. Berenstein. As I was wheeled into the surgery room, Dr. Langer appeared and introduced himself and said he was working with Dr. Berenstein. And if Berenstein wasn't able to do a stent and coil on my aneurysm, he was confident that he could clip it. I appreciated Dr. Langer's confidence, but what I most appreciated was when he told me his daughter's name was Molly and that he was going to take care of me. And he did. So let's get started. Thank you, Dr. Langer and Dina, for joining me for this short interview for the AVM and Aneurysm Foundation's community tool, TAAF Talk. Can you both take turns introducing yourselves, telling us where you are coming from, and how the greater community knows you? Dr. Langer, why don't you start?
My name is Dr. David Langer. I'm chairman of neurosurgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, which is part of the greater Northwell Health System in New York City. Lenox Hill is a hospital in Manhattan, and I've been here since 2013.
I am Dina Chon. I am the chief cook and bottle washer here at the Aneurysm and AVM Foundation, or TAAF, which is a lot easier to say, as we know. TAAF has been around for 15 years this year, super awesome anniversary year, created by our friend and founder, Dr. Michael Lawton, and two other family groups. And it was just a heart project of mine to be able to start TAAF Talk Magazine, which is a very different tool for our community. It's meant to initially, every quarter, we have one question that we ask all three of the community pieces, which we right now are considering to be a clinician and survivor and then support person. There's so many support people, we didn't want to make that team any lesser. And so we ask one question and we get all three perspectives in one place at one time. Additionally, the magazine publishes something usually weekly or bi-weekly, and because we are so super excited to have it be an online magazine, we are able to start doing all kinds of different interviews, and we have some music things that we've actually shared, and it's been amazing. And having Molly on as a contributor has been just a delight. So I'm really, really excited to be here. Dr. Langer, you don't know this, but every once in a while, you and I are on some of the same calls, or you're out there seriously preaching the good word. Like, you are amazing to listen to. I secretly found out one day how much you love wine by listening to you talk to Jabor. Like, it was just, it's great to be a fly on the wall, and it's even more amazing to have you here. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask you has to do a little bit with the why. You are incredibly clever. You are extremely outgoing. You're a great man who, obviously, we learned through the show, got into medicine because of his dad, but you could have been a dermatologist and made a boatload of money and not been so consumed by the amazing work that you do. What actually attracted you to neurosurgery?
Well, I first was making a decision about being a doctor is a lot easier than what your specialty is going to be, honestly. Yeah. My dad was a cardiologist. My grandfather was a pathologist. I really never thought of doing anything else other than being a doctor. And you still have to go through the mechanics and the gold star stuff, the grades and the organic chemistry and the MCAT. And so there are hurdles, but I'm not a genius, but you have to have a certain IQ just to get through that stuff. And luckily I did okay. But the decision of what kind of doctor you're going to be is a different process. I remember thinking of being a neurosurgeon when I was in college, and at that time, one of my old mentors said, "You can't be crazy to do that. All the patients die." And I kind of forgot about it. My father had a stroke when I took a year off between college and med school. The night I came home from, I was at Cambridge in England. The night I came home, he had a stroke, and I found him on the floor. And, that I never knew the impact that was going to have at the time. He never really recovered fully. He died 7 years later of complications from the stroke. In fact, I flew back to Cambridge I was supposed to go back before the New Year's. I ended up being at home with my family for until the end of January. And in fact, I flew home the night the Challenger exploded. So I have this
Wow.
very, you never remember. I remember the exact day I had that day, December 13th of 85, and the exact day when I flew home to Cambridge. Because of these events, these one macro and one micro in my life. But I think that was the beginning of this journey. My dad was a cardiologist. I was emulating him. I thought I wanted to do cardiology. I kind of turned away from it because I didn't love internal medicine. I didn't think the medical residents were very happy. They were egomaniacal in a different kind of way. They were kind of sassy and trying to prove how smart they were. And I just wasn't comfortable. I liked the grit and the almost athletic nature of surgery. I thought maybe I'd be a cardiac surgeon at one point. Cardiac surgery had a lot of divorced doctors. They were always in the hospital, and stents came out around the late 80s when I was a medical student. And I thought, I can't be a cardiac surgeon. Stents are going to take my business away, and cardiac surgery's over. Well, fast forward, I went to neurosurgery, became a neurovascular surgeon. I got divorced and remarried. I'm always in the hospital, and stents blew up my So go figure. That led to my doing a fellowship, 10 years out, because I was trying to make up for lost time. But, I think I did it because of my father. I try to cure him in some way. Neurovascular, he had a stroke. I must say, I wished I'd maybe paid a little bit more attention to stroke itself. At that time, stroke was not a surgical disease. We don't have nearly the devices that we have now. And I kind of wished I thought about the concept of suction, because I like to be innovative. But even today, after I train interventional, it doesn't beat surgery. There's nothing more beautiful than open surgery. And I actually am moving away from interventional. I don't really enjoy it that much. I'm not as good at it as I was. I'm an open surgeon, and I really enjoy doing the kinds of things I do. And you can't do everything. But long story short, that's how it happened. It's kind of some primordial soup events, and then some specific real experiences. And then I found mentors, people I wanted to emulate. The residents in neurosurgery just seemed like great guys. And Gene Flam took me under his wing as a medical student, and the rest is history.
Oh, Dr. Langer, you mentioned that stents and coils were kind of blowing up your practice. I've actually been wondering if there's kind of been a shift in the number of neurosurgeons who are coming through the pipeline that have the technical skills to do the tougher surgeries.
It's a major problem, I think. It's not just because of neurosurgery. What's happened is the devices are one thing. The devices really, I think the correct balance is about 70-30, about in that range. 80-20, I think 70 or 80% of aneurysms should probably be treated with a device, with a closed approach. That's where we are right now, at least on the data and the device safety and the types of case we're contemplating doing. The trouble is stroke. Every hospital is building stroke centers, and people who are trained in stroke can also want to treat aneurysms. And there's more and more stroke doctors. I have a slide showing the number of people who treated aneurysms with coils or stents when I came to New York in 1998, as opposed to now. It's just metastasized. And the number of aneurysms hasn't increased. It's the number of strokes, and stroke's a major public health problem. Don't get me wrong. And it's valuable to have a stroke center close to you. The trouble is hemorrhagic disease doesn't need to be treated within an hour. In fact, it's probably dangerous. You've got to get that patient to the best place. But because of the money focus in medicine and the importance of doing more cases and greed and the device business, we have a lot of people treating these things that shouldn't be doing it and have never seen a surgeon, are treating aneurysms with all sorts of new devices that haven't been proven. And it's really destroyed open neurovascular surgery. It's basically a figment of what it used to be.
And it leaves out, I'm sorry, I apologize. It also leaves out the absolute necessity if you are an AVM patient. I'm sorry, if that option exists for me, I want open surgery. I never want to see you again. You know what I mean?
The trouble with these, AVMs are even rarer, and fewer and fewer guys are getting their open vascular training. as the volume drops, they've got to do something else. I mean, if there's no volume, because if you have 100 people doing 2 cases as opposed to 2 people doing 100,
right,
disaster. And people young guys aren't as comfortable operating. They're not getting the same exposure. It's the time and it's much easier to keep patient in the angio suite because your catheter's there. I'll just do this. No, I have my kids' play is tonight. I want to get this done. I don't want to wait for an OR. Plus the whole angio suite itself, it's all disposable instruments. You don't have to worry about your scissors broke, and getting people into the OR is a major problem. We don't have the ability to shut cases down now and move an aneurysm there like we used to because they're rarer. And so when you do have an aneurysm to operate on, you're at the end of the day or following somebody else. And all these things have multiplied to the point of almost, it's scary, but in the end, we're in a better stroke treatment and worse aneurysm treatment. But there are far more strokes than aneurysms. And in the old days, we ignored stroke. And in the end, I think we're still going to treat probably 70% of aneurysms the right way. And that's the price you pay for progress. And it's just the unfortunate nature. Now, Molly, your aneurysm might be very treatable now with current. I don't have your angiogram in front of me, but Alex back then was the leader of the field. But the devices have gotten so much better and so much easier, and the catheters that, it's not necessarily a loss, it's progress. And but
right.
We've lost an element of what drove me to neurosurgery: the beauty of it, the elegance of it, the amount of effort it took to do it well, and then take bypass. And we're talking about Mike Lawton. Mike and I talk about this all the time. That bypass is kind of the ultimate kind of holy grail of neurovascular surgery, and fewer and fewer cases are available. And it's a loss. It's kind of like if you're the best guy at a sword, and the gun came out, you might have been the best swordsman in the history of swordsmen, but if somebody just shoots you with a gun, you're done. And it's like that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark where
he just drops.
And Harrison Ford just pulls out a shotgun and shoots the guy. It's just the nature of what happens with innovation. But I do think, unfortunately, that the finances of healthcare and the companies and the promotion of devices and the lack of evidence that they actually work is really the nature of a market economy. And there probably will be surgery down the road, but I fear that the talent and the skills of the surgeons will be diminished, and people that need the surgeons may not have them. And there's a minority of people that will suffer.
Yeah, I was in a meeting once, and then Molly, I want you to get to your next question, but it floored me. There was a gentleman from Turkey who actually, it happened to be Michael, but the assertion was that he could do anything endovascularly. Pardon?
That's Sergej. He's insane.
Yeah, it was I honestly, I know I'm a layman, but I knew enough to say, you cannot do everything endovascularly, and especially because it was an AVM Congress, and he was just, it's like no one took that gentleman's side. It was crazy.
Problem is that you need people like that to push the field. The truth is always a middle path. Alex was crazy.
Well, Alex will do it too. He will say the same thing. Like, he thinks that he can do anything that way.
Exactly. But, I think AVMs are a different animal. But, even more Jacques Murray, who has really backed off on some of this. He's had so many complications from this kind of transvenous stuff and blah, blah, blah. But long story short, the innovators and the people who really push the envelope tend to be a certain personality. And they're very outgoing. They're very vocal. They're narcissistic. They're egomaniacal. And they drive the field one direction. But the trouble is all the followers follow them, and that's okay until it goes too far. And right now, what really ultimately was the tipping point was stroke and the device business. And so you have all these companies selling their devices, and you have hospitals that want stroke centers to keep the patients there, because stroke is a shiny object for hospitals now, and it's a very bad toxic mix. And the truth is, though, when you add it all up, in the old days, probably there were a lot of people that were getting hurt by open surgery because there are certainly aneurysms that shouldn't have been operated on or were too difficult. So that's the same group that now will be left over on the aneurysms. Because if 70% of aneurysms could absolutely be treated, 70 to 80% could be treated with the device and safely. And it's probably the right thing to do. So if that 20% of patients that should have been operated on is not and hurt, that's probably less overall than what used to get annihilated by all the crazy open vascular surgeons that used to exist. I mean, these guys were worse. They were just as bad as Sergej. And when you had good evidence that coiling was good, they were saying you're never going to coil. They had some other excuse not to coil somebody. So our field is full of this. It's very, very selfish. And that's what I think our show was really showed that doesn't have to be that way. And, you can maintain empathy, you can be humble, you can be a human being and still be an outstanding neurosurgeon. And that's, I think, what we were trying to accomplish before we ever saw a Netflix opportunity.
Yeah, and that actually is a perfect segue to Molly's question.
I was just going to say that I think, Dr. Langer, one of your strengths is your ability to humanize the patient. I mean, you definitely did that for me. And after watching the show, it affirmed that you continue to do that throughout your practice. But all that empathy, I know, comes with a heavy weight, a lot to take home. So as a doctor, I was just wondering, are you able to release some of that so that how do you do that so you can keep going?
It's funny because I've had a few of these discussions, this keeps coming up. And, I think I just had a terrible complication about a month ago that I'm still suffering from. It's actually a friend of a friend, and it wasn't even an aneurysm, it was a spine case. And, it's been very difficult. I think as you get older, one of the reasons why you lose your empathy is its defense mechanism.
Right.
And as you get older, you think you get busier, and you don't want to bring this pain home to your children, to your spouse. But if you lose it, you lose the essence of what being human is. And we're not here just to operate. The other thing is our incentives in healthcare in general don't care about empathy. That
right.
You don't necessarily aren't incentivized to be empathetic. In fact, it may be the opposite, because if you're too emotional, it slows you down. There more is expected of you. And it's again, so everything's pushing you to writing papers and doing clinical trials and operating and making money rather than giving a shit. And so that's hard to maintain. I think the fact that you say that now, I mean, that was 2006 when I operated on you. It's gotten easier to be empathetic, but more difficult to filter. And I've become more conservative. I'm not saying I'm more scared, but I would rather avoid a complication and not operate on somebody and suffer the consequences of that in some ways than take some risk that may not work. And there are cases I have to do, and I struggle with it in the emotional piece, not in the OR, but the hardest thing to do, and I'm still recovering from this latest one, partly because the relationship I had with him ahead of time, which is also a lesson. But the way you have to get over this is you have to just tell yourself, and this is true, that if you make yourself the best you can be, if you train hard and work hard and focus on doing the right thing, that that's all you can do. And bad things happen. You're unlucky sometimes.
Yeah.
If you ever need a boost, call me. I'll get my kids and they'll say, thank you. Now, I know that you have thousands upon thousands of people out there who appreciate you, know your name, and you don't even know them because it's the trickle down,
I mean, I thought seeing like I said, that meant a lot to me. I think it comes at a very good time, because you have to remember, my wife and my friends say that, you think of all the people you saved. And it's true. I mean, you have to, we go through so much pain and suffering as honest surgeons. I mean, there are plenty of people who don't feel the stuff, and they are probably more protected. Like I said, somewhat of a mechanism for protection. Some people have reached out to me and said, I love the show. I could never be like that. I'm not like that. I can't. But, then what really are you? If you are, then you're just a robot. And
right.
we really do as surgeons, at least I do, we always remember the failures most.
Yeah.
They're the most thing I remember every single patient that it's like yesterday. And so the fact that you showed up today and that this was your children, you see, the positive that come out, that's great.
Well, I think that when you're getting closer to retirement, I might scoop you up and have you hang out with me, because the reason that I came to serve the Aneurysm and AVM Foundation was also from a point of loss. I lost my mother to a burst aneurysm on Christmas Day when I was 16. And I was with her when she died. The last thing she did was open her eyes, tell me she loved me, and pass out again. And that kind of event can be, I could have walked into the ocean with my pockets full of rocks. Like, that's really what I wanted to do. But instead, I was able to serve. And one of the things that Molly's heard me say 1,000 times is that service is healing. The foundation is very unique in that it's super tiny. And because of that, we get an opportunity to do one-on-ones every single day. It is that humanizing piece that Molly's referencing, but really it's the individualized care when they leave you that I know you probably want to do, right? If you had that, as you said, that time and that you weren't disincentivized to do. But the other focus of the organization is really on seed grants, making opportunities for younger researchers. And I know that, yes, there is this emphasis, of course, on publishing. But our hope is that in getting these younger researchers, that we also scoop them up and are transforming them, that we're reminding them every single time of their touchstone, which is patient-oriented. We ask them to come to our events. In fact, some of the grants are directly related to an event that they have to go to. So I'm curious, my question to you is, are there aneurysm or AVM related projects that you think need funding and attention? And if so, why do you think so, or why aren't they getting it?
I'm gonna start out with a story, and then I'll tell you what I think. So, I've actually put this on Instagram, on Twitter, and I talk about this in talks I give about COVID experience, because COVID was a whole other realization. Yeah. The stories that Margaret Mead, who's an anthropologist, was asked by a student what she thought was her first sign of civilization. And you'd think that she would have talked about, clay pots or grinding stones or art on the walls or the origins of fire. And she said, no, that the first sign of civilization was finding a human fossil with a femur that had healed. And she said that the reason why is in the animal world, if you break your leg, you die. You're eaten by a beast. You're attacked. You can't find water. You aren't fed, and that means that someone bound the wound, carried you, fed you, protected you from predators, and carried you to safety. And that was the first sign of civilization. And that caring for another human being is where civilization starts. And so that's true. That runs through all of us. I think your experience with your mother, you're caring for people now, and you're just doing it in a different way. Whether you do it as a neurosurgeon or as an empathetic, we all need that. I think that the answer to your question about where I see opportunities, I've been involved with a company what's called Playback now, Playback Health. I've told Christine about this ad nauseum. And I started this thing around 2007 before anybody cared about patient experience. What Playback is, it allows me to make a video, audio, photograph, chat, to store a moment for the patient so that they hear what I say, they take it on their mobile device, they go home with it. So if I go over their angiogram, this is your aneurysm, I'm going to put a clip on it, they see the angiogram again, and they show it to their loved ones, they can share it. There's no EMR package, they don't have to go on some website and download it with a password, it's on their phone. And we started this like 13 years ago. And then a buddy of mine who I've been talking to about ad nauseum about this for like, since around 2000, I would say 2001. Well, I started in 2013. He knew about it for the last 10 years, let's say. And I started in 2007. So he knew about 10 years. So I don't know, you don't know, your Randy Gerber and George Clooney, they sat on the beach in Cabo and started Casamigos tequila. It's the same kind of thing. He was sitting on the beach with me. He was hearing me talk about this idea, which is something like Instagram or Snapchat for healthcare. And he left his hedge fund on purpose, not to join me, but after about 6 months, he said, you know what? His son worked with me and loved the idea. And then Greg is a cyclist and broke his clavicle, and he didn't have his films and didn't understand. And so he offered to run the company. And we pulled it out of Northwell, and he raised money. We raised like $2 million and started Playback about 2 years ago. He made the name up, actually. And we've used this in COVID. It's actually in the 9th episode on the family where we do, because, telehealth historically was all outpatient, but there's a real role for inpatient telehealth, but none of the EMR providers can do that. And this mobility and then also sharing movies. So whether it's synchronous through a telehealth or through asynchronous communication, meaning I make a movie for you of your problem, or I go over your case either pre-op or post-op, create a deliverable, memorialization of moments, video discharge instructions, what your medications are, how to take care of your wound, how to give yourself an injection, how to breastfeed. You can imagine how phenotypic healthcare is, and there's a massive change. I think the problem with your organizations in general is you're kind of doing what everybody has done for the last 100 years, which is funding, they're the typical things to fund, basic science, and the likelihood of you coming, really funding something to completion is low. It's not zero, but, especially vascular disease now, it's so device-driven and so corporate that, endothelial biology or some platelet thing, it's possible you could incent some scientists and it might happen someday. But I think you're much better off as an organization funding this sort of stuff. Not necessarily Playback or the idea of Playback, but Playback, for example, you could use it and put it into environments that are outpatient, or use nursing could use it, or whatever. But the fact is, it's a much better use of your money to fund things that have real impact on patients, whether it's aneurysms or cancer, because I just think, we end up aspirationally funding ideas in young scientists where it doesn't mean we shouldn't do that. But the threshold to get these grants is less. Let those guys apply to NIH and let them apply to some of the, conventional ways, because chances are your money's gonna be a lot better spent, will be much more impactful in this space ultimately than it would be, funding something that has has to be like, moonshot to be successful. On the flip side of that, when I was a resident, just to give you an example, I actually was at Penn, and a woman scientist who I just happened to end up with she's a genius. She's the smartest person I've ever met. And she had this whole idea about RNA therapy, that we could use RNA like a drug and inject RNA. And I kind of got into this idea. So back in like 1990 or so, I was working in her lab. And then in 94, I was working with her as a resident. And I had a whole lab, and I was going to stay at Penn. I was planning on staying there originally, and I was going to work with Kate for the rest of my career, basically, because it was really working. We were the first ones to determine we could actually get the RNA expressed in rats and blah, 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 because there was a lot of reasons not to use it. Well, I left Penn because my chair took me away from there. And I ended up being, he took me to go to New York, which I wasn't planning on. It was really last minute. And then Kate's science now is the basis of the BioNTech and Moderna vaccines for COVID. She's a multimillionaire. She was probably worth $100 million. She became the chief scientist of BioNTech in Germany. She's incredible. So you never know. But I think that in the end, there's such a need for money in this space. And I bet you, if you look at all the investments BAF has made over the years in bench research, if one of them resulted in something therapeutic, I'd be surprised. But this is like powder skiing. You could find great projects and you'll make tracks, no question. And it's a needed thing. It's now important in the patient experience. Hospitals are actually paying attention to this, like, oh my God, like this matters all of a sudden, because you can make money with it. When I first came up with the idea of Playback, which is way back, all the hospital administrators, well, this is great, but how do we make money off it? How does this help us financially? Because it's ultimately all people care about. And frankly, If it can't make money, it can't survive. So it was just like a local project for years and years. But once we had mobility, cloud, and patient experience, the Affordable Care Act, and all of a sudden Medicare pays based on patient happiness and outcomes, this is a sea change in the way we're practicing medicine. In our contracts now, we have things like Press-Ganey scores and HCAP scores. They're in the contracts. Insurance companies pay attention to this. All these U.S. News and World Report ratings, patient experience has weight. And so this is a metric, and it's a valuable asset. But I don't think the funding organizations have fully engaged. The hospitals really haven't yet. So I really believe that this is something that you should pay attention to, and is much more likely to result in impactful projects ultimately that are going to affect true outcome than some endothelial biology project looking at a receptor. It's just the way it goes.
I really appreciate that. We've been fairly fortunate that every once in a while we get a great offshoot of something like that. One of my favorites happens to be a young lady in Canada, of all places, that's studying basically the effects of having to make the decision if you are unruptured. And they followed a cohort for a while just to see about their mental health and how they handled that. And it's that one's been very interesting. But you're right. And I think that it's challenging too, because different organizations such as ours, or as you mentioned before, BAF and things of that nature, we are trying to get these C grants into the right places so that they do become NIH grants. We've had a couple that have gotten really close. One with Dan Cook, I think, is really great. He was also on our board. But I think that where we end up spending the most of our time outside of that is in that space you're talking about. That's why we do one-on-ones, and no one else makes the time to do them. That's why we are spending all of the physical time over here. But you're right, not necessarily the money.
It's not sexy too. I mean, in our business, if you go into a residency interview, they're going to be like, see ya. They want everybody to talk about, I'm going to want to get an NIH grant, or I want to, I want a clinical trial of this. And so it's not sexy. The culture doesn't really, especially as a male, I really want to look at how empathetic patients are, how empathy change. They're like, that's for social workers to do. And neurosurgery is the worst. Maybe the only other thing beyond that is cardiac surgery. I mean, these guys are like, you got to be out of your mind, especially vascular neurosurgeons. It's like the worst. So, but by the same token, that doesn't mean it's wrong. And you never follow everybody else. That's the biggest mistake you can make.
I agree. That's why I always feel so lucky that we're the only people who do the one-on-ones. Like, we're the only people individualizing care after they leave. And honestly, I think I need to skip ahead for you, Mal. That's actually one of your real big questions for Dr. Langer, is this aftercare portion, right?
Right. Like you were saying, I left the hospital. I was told I was fixed, but I wasn't physically or mentally the same person as I was before the rupture.
Yeah.
And my family didn't really understand the possible deficits of a rupture, how to help me, what recovery should look like, or even where to find help. Granted, it was 14 years ago. I hope things are better. But I think we were sent home with maybe a pamphlet. But there was definitely no post-operative social services.
I'm sorry.
What? So I was wondering, I'm hoping that that's gotten better. Are social services now available for patients as they leave?
I would say it hasn't gotten that much better.
Yeah, my days are busy.
Not that we're not trying. The money's just not there. I mean, cancer survivors have the same problem. Really, anybody that has some sort of traumatic thing that changes, especially their brain or their medical health, it's a chronic problem. There's just not enough money for it. I mean, we never think about healthcare. Billions and trillions of dollars are spent on MRI machines because they create diagnoses for new surgical procedures. But no money's ever been spent on how to get that MRI report to a patient.
Yeah.
Or even explain them what the hell is going on. It's just because there's no money, and the money is always going where the money is. So if you were saying, well, if my patients really understand their medical problem, I'm going to get paid for that. then you'd probably have a cottage industry of companies that were designed. Now, it is getting better because there has been an effort at the government level to make this kind of soft science important financially to hospitals. I think it's more weighted than it's ever been, but there's so much legacy in hospitals between social work and the insurer and the discharge. Even the discharge itself, is the way it's baked into the EMR is just terrible. It's just that piece of paper that gets spit out at the end has less to do with you than most of it has nothing to do with your problem. In fact, the diagnosis often isn't even correct. And so we've worked tirelessly to fix that problem by using your mobile device to give you something that's about you. That's what personalized care is. Everybody thinks personalized care is, personalization of medicine is your DNA. Well, the number of cases that are going to solve on your DNA is like zero compared to giving somebody a mobile app with your exact diagnosis, your discharge instructions with voice, and your asked and answered questions recorded, and a picture of your wound and your follow-up appointments. That's personalized care. And, we're getting there. We have the device, we have the science, and we have the technology right now to do it. And it's just a matter of finding the right environments and the right clinical drivers and the right hospital leadership to accept this as an alternative to legacy solutions.
Well, you're talking legacy already, and that's going to be one of our last questions. But before I get there, I wanted to just say that getting folks to you sometimes, not necessarily you, but definitely to the final decision making when they are unruptured, it's terrifying. I actually just spent, I would say, a couple months, almost 2 months, going through, no joke, an Excel spreadsheet of a mom who was vetting physicians from coast to coast, and not just getting second or third opinions. I'm talking about, she was in the 20s at this point, and she was really at a point of what I like to refer to as, analysis paralysis. So I'm really curious. I've obviously watched you, as I said, as a fly on the wall. I've now watched you physically on TV. Do you ever just get to a point where you tell patients what you think they should do? Do you have a way that allows you to just say, stop, go do this. This is what's best?
I think, first of all, there are 4 kinds of surgeries. Surgeries that you don't need, you can have, should have, and must have. Simple, right? The trouble with aneurysms now, especially unruptured aneurysms, is that, first of all, there aren't enough aneurysms around. So in the old days, when there weren't as many people treating them, if you had an aneurysm, you saw a doc, and he said, you got to go to this university or this center. And so right off the bat, the referral was more centralized. Today, it's going the other direction. So there's every Tom, Dick, and Harry hospital has someone who can treat you. And in fact, that the problem with that is that they not only try to treat you, but they make it an emergency. So say you go to the ER with a headache and there's no rupture, and they do a CT and they find something, and they do an MRA, and they find, all of a sudden they keep you in the hospital, admit you, and they tell you have to have it tomorrow because it's a bomb in your brain. You got to get it done. So it's because it's a business, and I see this all the time. And very often those people are putting devices in unnecessarily, an aneurysm that never should have been treated, and that's because they need to do something. You were going to say something, Molly?
What should a patient be asking the doctor to make sure that they're not going down this rabbit hole?
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is probably make sure you're in a hospital that has a neurointensive care unit, has a residency or fellowship training program. Because if you ask the doctor and he's a fraud or isn't as good, they'll make stuff up. They will. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, if a junior guy may be terrific, but they have to be, well, I haven't done that many, but I'm as good as, I mean, there's a transition. There's a first day you're out of residency, right? But the first thing, the big mistake is it's not so much the doctor. And remember, we can only do so much with our hands. You have to have a team. And talk about discharge. You have to have a group of people that is empathetic and is sensitive to those things and can manage the problem. So right off, this isn't that hard to do. You'll know it when you see it. If you're in some community hospital or anywhere and you're talking to somebody who just wants to and doesn't have all the other bells and whistles, get the hell out of there. I mean, that guy may be okay, but God forbid there's a problem or there's, a complication, then you're in trouble.
Right.
First things first is you shouldn't be in a hospital that's not designed to treat the problem. And this happens all the time now because of stroke centers. So that's pretty easy to figure out. You can just, you can go online, or you could look at the types of you want to make sure they have cancer there, they have cardiac surgery there, they have other sick people there. If you're in a hospital that doesn't have cardiac surgery, forget it. That means that they just don't have, because that feeds back on all the other resources. They're really simple questions to ask that don't even seem like important. Like, do you do cardiac surgery in this hospital? No, we don't. Oh, okay. Do you do Whipples? Do you take a pancreatic cancer here? Well, no, that's really, okay, guess what? I'm out of here. Yeah. Because it's basically reflective of the case mix of the hospital. That's a really easy way to decipher the hospital itself. Now, the next thing is the doctor, because great hospitals don't all have great doctors. The trouble with your paralyzed friend, they'll never solve the problem, because ultimately you have to trust the person you're talking to.
Right.
That you can't, and what I may recommend may not be what my partner recommends, because I'm more comfortable operating. The other problem is there's a tendency to think that minimally invasive is safer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and remember the fact that if I'm 6 feet from your aneurysm, or 3 feet if you're now a radial approach, like people are actually saying, I hear
it every day, all over Twitter. It's insane.
What the frick does that matter? I mean, they make this sound like it's the greatest thing. Okay, so it's a little less pressure on your groin. That's the reason I should go to you, because it's a radial approach.
It's like the Tesla right now. Yeah. Like everybody wants one.
So, long story short, the best advice is know where you are, know what the person is capable of. That in general, if a person only does coiling, they ought to have somebody with them as a partner that has experience surgically.
Right.
Ask for the case to be conferenced. Get the case reviewed in that hospital and see what they recommend as a group. Do they have a neurovascular conference? We do. Every single case is reviewed, and we discuss the case. Especially, we do the ruptured cases too, because when we can, but more like, as ad hoc. But these are the kinds of questions. It doesn't mean, look, there's some very outstanding places that don't clip a lot of aneurysms, no question. That doesn't mean it's right. And there are lots of places that clip too many, because the open surgeon is not necessarily being ethical. So these places exist. I mean, I believe that our place is the best in the world, not because we're the best with our hands, because it's our hearts and our group that we make decisions for the right reasons. We don't have RVU contracts. We don't have financial ask the doc, how are you paid? Do you get paid does my insurance pay you directly? Are you paid do you have an RVU contract? That's another reason not to go there, because there's perverse incentives. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but you want to go to a place where money isn't the gold star, that North Star is just doing what's best for the patient. I get paid very well. I really do. I can't imagine, I make more money than I ever thought I did, but it doesn't, if I don't operate in you, I don't get paid any less or any more. I get paid well because of the group we built and the impact it's had in the greater hospital, because the culture we developed, we're really busy and everybody's rises. And now I realized early on that helping other people be successful generates, everything gets better. But very few neurosurgery departments are built that way. So that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, and I love Mike Lawton to death, I really do. But he's a dinosaur, and he's in a situation, it's nuts that the Barrow, they still are clipping way more aneurysms than they're coiling because of Mike's skills. And Mike's probably the most skilled neurovascular guy, one of the best in the world. I feel like I'm as talented as Mike, but I'm not gonna succumb to that, and just because I can do cool cases. The other thing is, people who know how many aneurysms they've treated, that's another pathology. Like, we love Robert Spetzer to death, who's going to be our guest next week. But the fact that it makes a difference how many aneurysms you've coiled and you got the number on the wall, come on. That's just not right. I mean, I hope I never clip as many aneurysms as he has.
Ultimately, the young lady, the mom, she actually ended up going. So I'm so glad to hear how you approach that, because it's ultimately how I end up, chatting with people too, is to say, teaching hospitals, obviously. I mean, we are, for better or worse, I'm obviously inclined to tell people that they should hang out at UCSF, but it's because of the manner in which they approach things. And I told her, I was like, at the end of the day, you have to go with your gut. Do you trust this man or woman to do what they say they're going to do? And they're going to go see Dr. Abla. So it's fascinating to me. And I so appreciate in every way, Dr. Langer, your honesty here and answering some of these questions, because it really goes to the meat of what we wanted to get at, and that's legacy. You actually very recently said to someone that you felt like you were in the latter part. I'm trying to remember the quote, and I'm going to get it wrong. Pardon?
I'm the beginning of my first trimester.
Yes, that's exactly how you put it. And I just thought it's such a fun and yet really, again, just this genuine way that you talk is it's nice. I grew up in the Midwest. It reminds me of that. But can you see your legacy yet? What do you want it to be? Is it hanging out there and it's just beyond you?
It's funny, people have asked me after Netflix, like, what are you going to do with this? Like, you have a whole world in front of you now. Or how are you going to make money off this? Like, what's your next step? What's, like, Michael asked me, like, what's your next step? Like, how have you thought about what your next? I'm like, honestly, I really hadn't. I didn't do it for that reason.
Right.
I did it because I wanted my kids to think that medicine was cool. And I wanted young people to consider being doctors or nurses or PAs rather than being a YouTuber or a rock star. Not that you shouldn't be a rock star, but there's so much to offer people in what we do, and it's a great life. We do. I have a great job, but we never did a really very good job of just expressing ourselves or letting people in. And the hospitals, normally if they're going to do a show, you go to some administrator first. Administrator says, "Oh, we can't do that. There's no way we can take that risk." And if they decide to do it, who do they give the opportunity? They give it some egomaniac doctor that thinks that they're curing cancer and wants the attention. And so all the real medical shows are some, face transplant or, some crazy, plastic surgery show.
Yeah.
And they're doing it to get patients. They're doing it to get more money. And they're doing it to show off their skills so people come to them. These crazy medical mystery shows and stuff. And we found the ultimate doctor to, fix your child's this or that, and that's basically par for the course for medical shows. But I think that does nothing to invigorate young people or to get them to see what we're really like. Their measures are Grey's Anatomy or, Chicago Hope or Resident or, House, which are entertaining, but they have nothing to do with the reality. And in fact, I think that I took my daughter to visit the set of Grey's Anatomy. She loves Grey's Anatomy. I took her there about a year and a half ago because one of my close friends is their medical director. And she met Ellen Pompeo to start to cry, and there's actually a video of this that I put on Insta, if you go look it up. And, I saw her impact that had on her. And we were already filming Netflix. And I knew that this would be even more of a positive thing to see the realities of the struggles, and the triumphs, and the failures, and the complexity of our environment, the surgeries. But I underestimated I thought the surgery were going to be really impactful, but I underestimated how impactful just our culture was and my personal voice. And I've gained in the last few months. My whole life's changed up here, not outwardly. Like getting recognized, I could care less. Celebrity sucks, by the way. And in fact, my daughter, my first time she saw the show, started to cry. I was like, "What's wrong?" She said, "Daddy, you're mean." I was like, "What do you mean I'm mean?"
Huh?
I think she saw me through the prism of Grey's. Like she wanted me to be some fictitious doctor. And when she saw that I was like serious, because I'm not like that at home, and that I was firm, and that I just dealt with the problem, she never saw me in that way. And it bothered her that I wasn't like Dr. McDreamy. I explained to her that that's not reality. That this is we made fiction out of nonfiction in Netflix, and we made fiction out of nonfiction. Whereas in actors make nonfiction out of fiction, and so it taught me, that was my early inkling into the impact this was going to have. But then the feedback I've gotten from emails and young people in our Brain Turns project, which we have 15,000 kids registered for our virtual internship, which is just phenomenal.
It's super cool.
I began to develop a new voice, and I became more confident in myself. I never lacked self-confidence, but it was different. It was more about being a great neurosurgeon, and that I knew I could do great things with my hands. But I've learned that this voice I have is rare, and that it's impactful, and that now Netflix has given me a new microphone, and it's given me the opportunity to be confident this is correct, and that this is something that I can tap into. And if I have a legacy now, which I'm still not really entirely comfortable with thinking that way,
Right.
and if I had to ask Mike's question again, it's basically to make people understand not just the complexity of what we do, but it's okay to be emotional and empathetic and still be outstanding. And that it's important that you address those feelings, and that you learn to cope with them, but turning them off completely is unacceptable. And it doesn't do you any good, because what drives me ultimately is to be better. And that fear of failure and not wanting to succumb to it makes me want to be a better surgeon, because that's that PTSD stuff I want to avoid.
Right.
And in the end, I think it's a rare opportunity. I mean, how many people get to be a star in a Netflix show? I mean, if this happened 10 years ago, it would have been on like National Geographic, and very few people would have even watched it. But, this is so huge. It's international. I've had talks with Brazil medical students. It's crazy. And I feel really, really lucky. There aren't a lot of people like me, for sure. I think Ruthie and Adi were really lucky to have found me, and I was really lucky to have found them. And everyone benefits. And I think hopefully we can be very impactful and change the way people think about doctors, neurosurgeons, and healthcare in general.
Dr. Langer, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You definitely made an impact on me and my family, and everybody that I talked to who has seen the show. So they understood what I was talking about when I said, awesome.
I really want to thank you too. Thank you for letting us geek out a little bit with you. And as I knew you would be, I will say it again anyway. Thank you for being so genuinely you. I know that the folks that read our magazine are going to be excited that they don't have to read this time. They're going to get to see you in person. And I have to tell you, the first time that I met Molly was when I was leading support group there on the Parnassus campus for UCSF. And I want to add just one more thank you, because she's lovely and she's created an amazing family. To have you guys together again really just makes the legacy of love that I am trying to create that much stronger and better. And we're so grateful. Thank you for your time today.
See this person come out of the woodwork. You lose touch with our page when people are, the people who do badly, you hear from.
Oh, yeah.
And the people who do well, maybe you get a note or a bottle of wine. It's all great. But that's part of the reason why when people do well, it's gone. It's like in the vapor. I mean, I think the fact that she came back to me this way, and now we're seeing her again, seeing her children.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
We think so too. Well, if it's cool with you, we're going to end this today. We're going to thank you again. And then obviously, please be aware, we're going to send it to you so you can hang out and take a look, but maybe we'll get to chat with you in another couple months, see how you're doing.
If it goes online, you may want to take out any negative thing I said about Lawton. That would be bad.
Yeah, I think he's okay. Well, thank you so much.
I actually love Mike to death. I think he's an incredible guy. Incredible.
Yeah. Well, like all of your comments so far, it takes all of you. I mean, literally, if there wasn't a Mike Lawton, there wouldn't be a Deep Abla. If there wasn't, all of these things exist, luckily for us, because we need you guys.
Well, thank you for tracking me down. And it's been an absolute, it came at a good time for me, and I can't say enough.
Yeah. Have a happy weekend.
Take care of yourself.
Take care.
Be good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.